This tutorial is an overview of different levels of analysis in political science. The theory that we use to analyze society, power relations, politics, will make certain assumptions about how the world works and thus act on a particular level of society. So I've divided here between micro level analysis, meso level analysis, and macro level analysis, which is broadly speaking the three uh, different levels that we can talk about social science, political science. Micro level analysis, I'll start here and then I will go over the other two. So the goal with this video is to give you a sense of what type of theory that you might be encountering in political science. When you read up on a particular new theory that you haven't seen before, you should, by looking at the assumptions that the theory makes, you should be able to place it in terms of the level of analysis and in terms of how it thinks about individuals and social processes in society. And that should give you a notion about how the theory operates as an analytical tool. So let's start with micro level analysis. This is the type of theory that focuses on the actions of individuals. I have here included rational choice, public choice theory, and behavioralism. So on this level, the spotlight is on the individual. What is the individual doing? It can include things like the personality or personal history of the individual, sometimes zeroing in the single politician or the single person who is responsible within an organization, their beliefs, their skills, their capacities and preferences, and so on. In rational choice theory, then, this is a theory that builds on looking at a single individual, assuming that the outcomes of results of decisions, that a decision is made based on a rational choice, hence the name of the theory. In political science, we also talk about public choice theory, but these are really the same. And this perspective really straddles the spheres between economics and political science. So this is a perspective highly influenced by economics. So individuals then are rational actors. This theory assumes each individual will seek to maximize the utility of each choice they make in the process that's being studied. And it really seeks to understand and locate the incentive structures for individuals in particular social positions. A person who is unemployed will most likely do whatever they have to do to maximize their own utility. And so then the incentives of a welfare program will be very important for how the people who are in that welfare program will act. Likewise, a journalist will have to act according to the incentive structures within the company that journalist works in. A CEO will do the same, how to satisfy the stockholders, how to interact with the middle level major managers. Politician will also have an incentive structure to act within, satisfying the party base, satisfying media, satisfying voters, and so on and so forth. So there's a series of incentive structures for each individual. And what are those incentive structures in each particular social position? And that's what this theory is trying to discern. Moving on to behavioralism, this starts from individuals again, but focuses more on opinions and beliefs and linking those to behavior. And behavioralism very much tries to do aggregates using massive samples, several thousands, to correlate streams of opinion within society and try to identify trends, draw conclusions about mass action, really, in society. This perspective relies very much on quantitative research. You will see a lot of polling, opinion polling. You will see a lot of statistics. You will see a lot of surveying to try to find mass aggregates of individual opinions and beliefs in this school of thought. So that's two examples of micro-level analysis. Moving on to meso-level. This is a mid-level analysis, which means that it's tracking actions of organizations. To a large extent, it really treats an organization as the seat of agency in society. One typical such is institutionalism. It considers, and now we're moving up the scale here. We've gone away from individuals, and now we're looking at individuals collected into groups, organizations, right? Government then is seen as a set of organizations, its departments, its institutions. You can't really say in institutionalism that government is a single actor. You can zoom out to the government as a single actor, but you can also zoom in and what we call disaggregate government and consider each ministry on its own, each public agency as its own, even disaggregate a public agency and go down and think about what happens at top level of the public agency. What does the departmental head say? What does the minister say? And then go down to mid-level managers and then go down to local offices and think about the interactions between each level of organization. So in this perspective, you'll very commonly see organizational charts to map the different interactions, because each organization, each part that you're looking at will be acting according to its own logics and constraints, given its position in the system and its relation to others. And that others could be other levels within the same organization, other organizations, and the overall environment. And the importance here is on institutional design, the location of power within that. Who has authority, who doesn't? What are the rules that all these organizations are acting according to, and so on and so forth. Historical institutionalism here is a variant of institutionalism which tracks how a set of institutions have developed over history and basically argues that what happens in the future will depend greatly on what happened in the past. You'd never start with a blank slate. And this has actually been covered in a previous video on this channel on the significance of history within political science. Moving on, we could talk about state-centered theory. Here we're zooming out a little bit more, and now the state is considered a single actor. So you aggregate all those public agencies and crown corporations and everything and treat it as just one unity. And it's very top-down. It assumes that the state is relatively autonomous. It has its own interest that it's pursuing. It can do things. It wants to do things. And that might not entirely be what the voters want to do. Might be something else. It can coincide with voters, but it doesn't have to. And of course, that the state seeks to influence political outcomes, which actually would suggest that while the voters are trying to influence the state during elections and by the democratic process, the state is likewise trying to influence voters to do certain things so that the state fulfills its own objectives. Also, it can influence other actors. It can influence corporations, interest groups, other states, and so on and so forth. So it has to accommodate a whole series of organized interests in society at the same time, because, of course, others want to influence the state in return. So this whole balance between how the state acts in relation to others is really the focus of this type of theory. So now that we looked at micro and meso level, let's go to the highest level of analysis, macro level. In this level of analysis, we're looking at large-scale structures and processes. This is beyond a single state. It's beyond a single organization. It's beyond a single corporation. The sum in this perspective is really greater than the parts. It affects everyone. Everyone is caught up in it in some way. Doesn't necessarily mean that no one has agency, but it sometimes in history, the tendency has been to say that structure is what matters most and that it's very difficult to change those structures. Those structures will predict outcomes, if not deterministically, then with great potency and significance. And here's a series of perspectives on that. We could talk about political economy, follow the money, the influence of the economic system, be it capitalism or be it something slightly more local. How is everyone caught up in the needs and the mechanics of the political system? That goes for a single corporation. It goes for the state. It goes for non-government organizations. It goes for the media. It goes for political parties. How are all of these conditioned by how the economic system overall ticks. So a corporation might have a strongly social agenda, but it still has to be able to make profit. And how does that logic influence the types of actions it can take and the types of actions it cannot? And here, of course, the most classic example of type of structural political economy analysis is Marxism, which is really discussing how classes and the struggle between classes is shaping society and how the economic mechanisms of the economic system compels people to act in a certain way depending on their position in the economy. I'd also submit that identity politics belong to this level of analysis. It discusses very much how the distribution of power in society is linked to identity. So gender, racialization, ethnicity, class, sexuality, disability, and so on. And so a person who is born as a woman, for instance, will confront different barriers, perhaps different experiences, very likely, than a person who's born as a man and has been socialized into those genders. And how do the culture around these things, the social construction is the term really, around gender, racialization, and all these types of aspects, how do that capture and some individuals and privilege others depending on their identity? And again, these are processes that are much larger than single individuals, processes that single organizations can have great difficulties changing on their own, and that very often has to take a long time to change. And of course, we've seen this. A good example would be the feminist movement, who has been an active social movement for at least a century, depending on how we count, and has made arguably some progress. But of course, how large is that progress? How much is left to do? That is up for debate. And it's a good example of how these processes can be very slow, how change can be possible, but how the barriers to change because of ideas that have become common sense are so difficult to affect over the short term. In this type of analysis, discourse analysis is very common. Of the study of how people talk and how people express ideas and how people make assumptions, sticking to general analysis. Why do we find that so many associate pink to girls and women, while blue is associated with maleness in some sense? And how are different traits ascribed to one gender and other traits ascribed to other gender? That's one way of thinking about the discourse analysis in this perspective. Finally, here I've added political culture because, of course, again, this is greater than the parts. How the culture of a political community shapes and constrains action. You can't really discuss how healthcare should be done in Canada the same way it has been discussed, and the nature of privatization of health, for instance, of healthcare, can't be discussed the same way in Canada as it has been discussed in the US. So again, that's culture, and culture is greater than the sum of the parts. It's going to be an analysis that discusses all of society at once and how that constrains the actors within that society. So that's an overview of different levels of analysis in political science and how to think about the theories and their assumptions about the social world. That could be a guide for you when you want to compare different theories and the veracity of these different theories to each other, to your particular favorite analytical